Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's guest is one of Hollywood's most accomplished and highly respected costume designers. After a brief career as a dancer in Broadway shows starring Judy Holliday, Zero Mostel, and Carol Burnett, she reinvented herself, first as an assistant to the genius designer Bob Mackie, then as a costume and wardrobe coordinator, working with superstars Anne Margaret and Diana Ross, and then as a full-fledged costume designer in her own right. She spent 30 years designing costumes on dozens of TV shows and movies and was nominated 3 times for an Emmy Award. She's worked with everyone, including Penny Marshall, George Clooney, Larry Hagman, Betty White, Reba McEntire, Cloris Leachman, and so many more. In 2018, the Nevada Women's Film Festival awarded her their first ever Woman of Achievement Award. And now she's written a fascinating memoir entitled Stars in Their Underwear, My Unpredictable Journey from Broadway Dancer to Costume Designer for Some of Hollywood's Biggest Stars. I'm thrilled and delighted to welcome Diana Eden to our show. Diana, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Diana, I have to tell you that I absolutely loved your book because it's not just an inside look at the backstage of drama of dressing the big stars. It's a very poignant testament to the importance of pursuing your dreams despite whatever obstacles confront you. Congratulations on this wonderful book.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Now, you started out at the age of 15 as a ballet dancer with the National Ballet of Canada, but when you were 16, they told you that you were 2 inches too tall. So after graduating from university at the age of 21, you went to Boston and joined the road company of My Fair Lady. You had an enormous drive to succeed as a young person. And I'm just wondering, where did that drive come from?
I don't know. I can't really. I just know that I always wanted a career. I wanted to see the world. I wanted to be the best at whatever I did. I don't know where, the root of that is. Maybe it's, wanting to be loved, wanting to be appreciated. But yes, it was there from very early on.
In 1962, you danced in the last Rat Pack show at Club 500 in Atlantic City with Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra, and Sammy Davis Jr. What was it like to see those legends performing together?
It was pretty amazing. Actually, the whole week was amazing because the whole town seemed excited. They knew that they were coming. We started with just Dean, and then Sammy arrived, and the shows got more kind of loose and crazy, and they lasted longer, and they went on later. And then, of course, we heard that Frank was coming in. And when he arrived, I remember he walked in the door, and he was surrounded by this phalanx of security guys coming in with him, and he was in the center, and it was Frank. There's no doubt that it was Frank. And the last show went on until I think 4 a.m.
Wow, what I wouldn't have done to be in the audience of that show.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Diana, I had to chuckle when I read that you described yourself in the book as an extrovert trapped inside an introvert. Yes. You actually had the nerve to pick up the phone and call George Clooney, the director of My Fair Lady, and ask if you could be in the movie. It seems to me that the extrovert Diana managed to prevail when you needed her to, don't you think?
When I needed her to, yes. To this day, I don't like calling people that I don't know, but somehow I just was so determined. And I remember actually sitting on my bed next to my phone, which was on my bedside, trying to work up the courage. And it just miraculously, I was put through. So, it was just a fluke. I think the timing was perfect because it was a couple of days before they started filming. So he wasn't in a meeting, and I got through. So yes, when I need to, I can do what has to be done to get what I want.
When I look at your career as a dancer, it's amazing how many highs and lows you endured. Your first Broadway show, Hot Spot, starring Judy Holliday, was not a success and quickly closed. You went to LA to be in My Fair Lady, but the choreographer never came through when he promised he would. You got a good role in the Broadway show Fade Out, Fade In, starring Carol Burnett, but the show opened and closed not once, but twice.
Yeah.
Looking back, Are you surprised at the tenacity and perseverance you had when you could have just gone running back home to Toronto?
No, I'm not surprised at all. I always felt different from Toronto. I love Toronto to this day. I think it's an amazing city. And I gained a lot from growing up in Toronto. The exposure to the arts and the availability of shows at the Royal Alex and theater of all kind and art and music. But I also felt that my life would have been different in Toronto, and there was no way that I was going back to be a good Toronto girl. I ran away to join the circus. What can I tell you? That's me.
I was really struck by your eye-opening comments about being a chorus dancer. You wrote, and I'm quoting you here, "I could no longer tolerate the cattle call auditions. I didn't like lining up to be examined as if I were goods for sale. I could no longer tolerate the way the dancers work the hardest, yet earn the least, and are given the least respect as intelligent performers." And Diana, that's not all. You also wrote about the sexism and sexual harassment that happened, with men regularly groping the dancers. Even Zero Mostel was a groper. You must be so happy that with the Me Too movement, this kind of behavior is finally being denounced.
Exactly. I mean, I think back to the 60s, and I can't even imagine going to the producer or anyone and saying, "Oh, so and so groped me." They'd say, "Well, so what? Like it or we'll replace you." It was so part of the culture at the time. But getting back to dancers being the least appreciated, I was recently watching a dance number on YouTube with, I think it was Liza Minnelli, Liza with a Z. And she has a number with two dancers, and it was fabulous. And I waited for the end credits to see who the dancers were. And of course, they're not even mentioned. Whereas the assistant makeup artist, was mentioned. And I started sort of talking about it on Facebook, and they said, yeah, dancers never were credited in any of those TV specials or films, even if they had, a featured part. Fortunately, that's changed too. Dancers are much more respected and appreciated.
Well, thank heavens for that, because they add so much to these productions.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Well, eventually you ended your career as a performer and got into the world of costume design. Mm-hmm. How difficult was it to let go of the need to be in the spotlight as a performer and to just be happy in a supporting role to a big star?
That was tricky because I did like performing. I love being on stage, and I loved what stage allows you, which is to be somebody a little different with the protection of it being a performance. I miss that. I miss dancing too. And when I started with Margaret, I was working with her dancers, and I just wanted to join in and be one of them. And I had to realize that no, that wasn't my job. My job was to make the dancers look good, to make Margaret look good. And so that was difficult. Well,
you had a long working relationship with Margaret. How did you first get the job as her wardrobe coordinator for her Las Vegas shows?
It was actually through one of her producers who I actually met at a party, and he was looking for someone to coordinate all of the dancers' wardrobe. And at the time, I'd never worked in costumes, but he said, well, you know what dancers need, so you'd be perfect for the job. And I said, well, okay. And of course, I did know what dancers needed. I knew what was right to make them comfortable, and how their dance shoes needed rubbering and their clothes need to stretch and all of those things. So that's how I got started.
You worked as Bob Mackie's assistant, and you were very involved in the MGM Grand Hotel show Jubilee. Tell us about Bob Mackie, Diana. What was he like?
Well, I'm thinking about then and now, because ironically, he just came to a book signing I did last week in Palm Springs. And that shows how kind and generous he is, because he is really, truly the costume design star and a major celebrity and has his own book coming out. So the fact that he would come to my book signing was really, really kind. But he has mentored so many people into the business. And almost any costume designer or costumer, around my age has said, oh, yes, Bob helped me with this, or Bob recommended me for that. However, when he was working, he could be intense. I never saw any of the famed moments of temper that I've heard stories about. I never saw those. But I think in the early days, he could be quite tempestuous. But to me, he was generous and kind, but he worked very, very hard. He was a perfectionist, which is where I learned that a costume designer should have input and control over every little detail from, inception to performance. So I learned my work ethic, my costume work ethic from Bob. And so I can't speak highly enough of him.
I think it's a tribute to you that he took the time to come to your book signing. That tells me how highly he regards you.
Well, thank you. Hopefully.
I hope we can get him on our show one day when his book comes out. I would love to interview him.
Yes, his book comes out almost any day if it's not out. So yeah, you should reach out to him soon.
Now, you worked very closely with Diana Ross as her wardrobe assistant for her 1982 European tour. You said that everyone had to call her Miss Ross, and they referred to her as the boss, but you said that she's not a diva. You wrote, and I'm quoting you here, that she is driven to be the very best, but she's also very protective of her hard-earned stardom. What did you mean by that, Diana?
By the time I worked with her, she'd already been working many years, with the Supremes and with Berry Gordy, and had come up, through the ranks. So she had learned a lot about keeping control of the money. For instance, she signed all of the paychecks herself. She didn't delegate that to lawyers and managers. She also wanted first-class treatment. And so if anyone was, sloughing off and giving her less than their best, she didn't appreciate it. I think diva has gotten an association that you're, a little bit
temperamental.
Okay, yes. I don't want to use a B word on your show. It's far too classy a show. But, a diva can also mean that you are at the top of your craft, that you expect the best, that you are grand and have grand ideas. I mean, she knew how to make an entrance, let's face it, whether it was on stage or in a helicopter coming into a Super Bowl halftime game. I mean,
Well, there was a rumor that her staff was afraid of her. Did you ever experience that?
Afraid in the sense that don't goof off. Not afraid like she was going to, tear your head off or be verbally abusive, which then there are some stars who are that way. I will be perfectly honest, especially in the music world, so I've heard. But you knew you had to give your A game when you were around her. And but of course I knew her because I was the only one in her dressing room when she was getting ready for the show. So even though we weren't chit-chatting like old girlfriends, I was nevertheless very close to her. And I knew when she was nervous, I knew when she was upset, I knew when she was happy, I knew when she was concentrating. And so my experience with her is really nothing but the best. I had an amazing tour, and I saw a star at work adapting to different things in an amazing way. I mean, like the night that I talk about in Hamburg, where she was already out of her gown and ready to get dressed and go home, and the audience wouldn't leave. So she put on a white terry cloth robe and came out and sang 2 more numbers. And the audience loved it. It felt like their special treat. So she always had a sense of the dramatic. And so that's what I mean about a diva.
I was so impressed when I read that because I saw Diana Ross in concert in Toronto in 1979.
Oh, wow.
And she did the same thing. She didn't come out in a bathrobe. She came out in a black leotard and sang two more songs.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Now, you were the costume coordinator for the 1983 worldwide live broadcast of Diana Ross's legendary Central Park concert that
Yes.
got rained out and had to be repeated the next night. I
Mhm.
want to tell our viewers that your description of what went on during that experience alone is well worth the price of the book. And I'll leave it at that so people can read it for themselves. But
Thank
bravo, you really took us there, Diana.
Oh, good. Good. Thank you. Well, I appreciate your saying that.
You know, for a first-time author, you have an uncanny ability to write as if you're sitting there talking to someone. And I really felt like you and I were sitting down, having a drink, and you were just giving me these wonderful stories. It's quite a gift you have.
Thank you. I have heard that from several people, and that really gives me pleasure because, I'm not trying to write the grand Pulitzer Prize winning novel, so that would be okay too, I guess. But I do want to share my stories and my love of the business and the fun that I had, as well as the down times. I mean, some of the experience was so exhilarating and so extraordinary. And if I can make my readers, feel that they were there too, they were just standing right next to me, that's very gratifying.
Well, you did. Now let's talk a bit now about your television career.
Yes.
You were the costume designer for the TV sitcom, The Facts of Life. You
Mhm.
wrote that, and I'm quoting you here, sometimes it's not the most brilliant design talents that get you the job. It's also your personality.
Yeah.
Is that because you have to have excellent people skills to deal with the egos of the stars you're working with?
Yeah, definitely. Film and television is a very, very collaborative job. And you can't just walk in and say, all right, this one's going to wear that and that one will wear this and be done with it. It is a collaborative process of working with actors and directors and the producers and even the network executives. And everybody has to work together, and everybody in the end has to go away feeling pleased about the results. So having patience and having a way to deal with people was really, I think, what got me my first job.
Did you ever have to deal with actors who insisted on wearing clothes that looked terrible on them because they were in denial about their age or their figure?
Yes. Sometimes that would happen. But again, that's where the costume designer skill comes into play. I mean, sometimes we have to be psychologists. And I, I do remember telling one actress who found something that she loved. And I said, no. I said, that's when you see that on camera, you're not going to like it. And I put it that way. I didn't want to say, oh, you look huge in that. Just, yeah, there is a way to work with actors. And of course, I wasn't always perfect at it, but I did learn over the years. And by the time the actor leaves the fitting room, they should be happy with their costume, because if they're not happy and they end up on set and the director is, got a lot of work to accomplish, if the actor is complaining about the costume that the old costume designer put them in and they really hate it, I mean, that can really hold up production and make everybody look bad.
I want to throw a few names at you and get your reaction of what they were like to work with. Let's start with Cloris Leachman.
Cloris was amazing. I have to come up with a word for her.
How about eccentric?
Well, yes, but she's more than eccentric, because you can be a negative, miserable person and be eccentric. She is a piece of dynamite. When she enters a room, you know about it. She's funny. She has this energy, which is amazing, but she also has very strong opinions. For instance, she hated anyone who smoked. And I've seen her go up to, one of our guest stars who was standing outside rehearsal hall having a cigarette, and just go straight up to him. In this case, it was a him, rip the cigarette out of his mouth and say something hilarious so that they didn't, belt her. So her energy, her aura was very positive and funny. And I learned quite a bit from her, actually, because I was a pretty new designer and she had an instinct about clothes. And so I kind of knew, to listen to her because she was usually right.
She sounds brilliant.
Yeah, I think so.
How about Penny Marshall?
Okay. Penny Marshall was a little what I call prickly, droll, dry, not unkind. But, I tell the story when I came in to interview her with her for A League of Their Own. She's sitting at this great big desk with a huge bowl of spaghetti, which she's eating for lunch. And she said, "I'm sorry, I didn't have time for lunch." And go ahead. So I understand she's got to eat, poor lady. She's been too busy, but I'm trying to interview with someone who is putting spaghetti in her mouth. I don't know. She and I didn't really bond, let's put it that way, but I never felt anything bad from her. She never disliked my work. She never criticized me. She just she had for me a certain kind of prickly personality, unlike her brother, Gary, who was just the sweetest, most lovable man in the world.
You wrote about Penny Marshall that although you never felt any negativity from her, you didn't feel any warmth or encouragement or personal connection with her either.
Yeah, which was a shame because that show was such a fun experience otherwise. I mean, we're kind of reshooting the movie only for television, and we had a lot of the original people, and we were out on location playing baseball and, having a good time. So it was a shame that I didn't feel any particular warmth from the top. But, sometimes that happens. You can't win them all.
What about Larry Hagman?
Oh, Larry.
He sounds kind of eccentric too.
Definitely eccentric, but not eccentric in a way that, gets in the way. To me, eccentric is fine. You're an actor. You have a right to be a little eccentric now and then, especially if you're, a very successful actor. But he loved to hold court. He would sit, when we were setting up shots or in between, he would sit in his director's chair and tell stories, and we'd all gather around, and he loved to hold court, and it was fun. Why not?
Now, I can't resist asking you about Betty White. What was she like to work with?
Betty, you cannot say enough good things about Betty. Bless her heart. Hard worker, a thorough pro,
upbeat.
Fun. Oh, yes. I'd never seen her discouraged or in a bad mood. Always upbeat, a quick wit. I mean, a wicked sense of humor. And
humble.
Oh, so humble. I mean, when she flew up to Vancouver to work on a film, her trailer was, back a distance from where the set was. And she had a day where she was doing a number of scenes and had to change clothes all the time. So it meant they had to put her in the van, drive her to her trailer. The trailer has 3 steps up. She would change clothes and then reverse, come back to set. And I said, wouldn't it be smarter if we found a place on set in a corner and set up a dressing room here? And she said, oh, no, darling, I'm fine. I'm really fine. I'm used to it. It's quite okay. And that was her. She didn't want an extra fuss.
The ultimate professional.
Ultimate professional.
Well, your TV career sounds like a roller coaster of going from a frantic work schedule to nothing. Yes. Because shows got canceled, sometimes overnight. And then there's that constant search for the next job. Were there ever times that you worried that you might not work again?
Oh, probably every time. It's a saying among, us who work in television, I'll never work again. When a show closes, you always think, oh, maybe this is the time when the phone won't ring or all the new young producers have found other people they like better. And my husband was wonderful. He said, "Oh, come on, you know the phone will ring." And sure enough, the phone would ring, and a day later, I would be booked. So, yeah, but it is a strange business because there is very little, what is the word, financial security. You do go from show to show. You're a gypsy. And so it means you may have a show where you're going to work 12, 14 weeks and you're earning fabulous money. And then, the season ends and you don't work for 6 months. And savings are going down and down and down. And you say, "Oh my God, please let me get a new show for fall." And I was lucky, I always did. But it's a hard way to live. There's excitement to it, but sometimes the financial insecurity can be very tiring.
Diana, you really opened yourself up in this book in terms of your emotional journey. You wrote about your self-doubt and lack of confidence. You talked about periods of loneliness, depression, and even a suicide attempt. And you were very frank about the huge adjustment after the sudden and tragic loss of your dear, wonderful husband, Dominic, and then transitioning into retirement in Las Vegas. Do you think that writing this book may have been therapeutic for you?
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. When you get to a certain point in your life, you do have time to look back. I had written some of these stories previously in blog form or for a magazine article. So I had written a lot about things because I like to write. It's therapeutic even at the time that I'm writing. But yes, you do kind of want to tie up the loose ends and reassess and see where you've been and where you are now. So, yeah.
Now, clearly, Diana, you're a very resilient person, and your book is so inspiring for people who may not be satisfied where their careers are going. Your book tells us not to be afraid to venture out and try something different. But what I want to know is, how long did it take you to fully appreciate that you were actually very good at being a costume designer?
Quite a long time.
You had the imposter complex. That's what I call it.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, I'm a fraud, and one day they're going to find out.
Me too.
Yeah. It's quite common.
But why do you think it took you so long to realize that you kept getting more jobs, that you never really were unemployed that long, because you were actually really good and people really liked you?
Yes. I don't know. I mean, every personality is different. I know some people who have just that innate confidence from early on. My husband had it. He just knew that, whatever he attempted, he'd be good at. He wasn't terribly ambitious, but he had that inner confidence. And I was the opposite. I don't know whether, going back to early days of growing up during the war and then coming to Canada and having to readjust when I was only 10, 11 years old and feeling very out of place. That was very hard. And I had never really thought about being a costume designer. I always thought I was going to be a great ballerina until, I couldn't dance anymore. So finding myself doing something different, I kept saying, can I really do this? Am I just lucky? Do they really like me? I will be very honest about that. It really took me a while. And now that I'm teaching, actually, and I see other my students struggling at the very beginning of their career and learning how to draw and how to make costume decisions. And then it just pops into my head and I think, oh, that was easy. I knew the solution to that. And then of course it's easy for me. I've been doing it all my life and I'm good at it. So sometimes it takes a lifetime. Hopefully for more people, it will only take half a lifetime, but for me, it's taken a lifetime.
Diana, I want to ask you about the letter you received from your mother, which she sent you a few days before she passed away. Mm-hmm. It was such a beautiful letter and so full of love for you. She said in the letter, and I'm quoting you here, if there is another dimension where the spirit lives on, I will always be very close to you. So I have to ask you, Diana, do you feel her presence near you, watching over and protecting you?
Not in that sense. I feel her in my artistic activities. When I look at a piece of clothing, I was looking at, in fact, I put it on Instagram last night, a beautiful evening coat that was so gorgeous. And I was thinking my mother then, because she had a wonderful evening coat and she loved to dress up. I have a painting on my wall that she did when she was in College of Art back in the decades ago. And her spirit is with me more than that she's looking out for me and protecting me. It's a different way to experience her and to feel her. But that letter, of course, was extraordinary. And, I really miss having my mother and my father as an adult. They both died when I was a very young adult. And I miss the opportunity I might have had to have had my parents when I was, fully grown up and finally well-adjusted and could have had an adult-to-adult relationship. I'm really sad about that sometimes.
But Diana, you've had so many unforgettable moments in your life. Now just listen to this. Soak this up. You got to watch Rudolph Nureyev and Margot Fontaine dance the pas de deux from Le Corsaire. You were on the same bill with Streisand, Bobby Darin, Carol Burnett, Julie Andrews, Carol Channing, and Harry Belafonte at the LBJ inaugural gala. You were the Bierstein girl in the movie The Producers. You worked on the Emmys, Grammys, Golden Globes, and People's Choice Awards. You did the costumes for the opening and closing ceremonies of the 1984 Olympics and the bicentennial of the Statue of Liberty. You dressed Lloyd Bridges as a transvestite. You even designed costumes for Michael Jackson's pet chimpanzee and for an orangutan.
Yeah.
And you even got to see George Clooney in his underwear. Do you really get how amazing your life has been?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I know it's been an incredible life. Yeah. It's I have been fortunate to have some pretty extraordinary experiences.
Do you sometimes have to pinch yourself and say, I really lived through all that? I really met all these people?
I know. Yeah, sometimes. Yeah. And it's amazing that as I'm watching television and I'll see an actor and I'll think, oh yeah, I costumed him. I costumed him, her, whatever. And some of them were really young when I costumed them, and now they're, well into their adulthood.
Well, I love what you wrote about retirement. You said, I'm quoting you again,
Yeah.
We spend so much time in our lives striving to do better, to gain more recognition, to earn more money. That striving becomes a way of life, a bad habit. It has been so hard to let go of that need to accomplish something. I've been able to let go of many of the demands I made on myself, and now I only take the projects that really interest me. I don't always need to get things done. Most things can wait another day. I really love that, Diana. And now you're teaching costume design at the University of Las Vegas. I don't think you retired. I think you rewired.
Yes, exactly. Rewired. That's a very good way to put it. Yeah. It's a pleasure to quote work because I want to, not because I have to.
Do you have any advice for young aspiring costume designers?
Sure. To try everything, not to say, well, I want to be a director, therefore I'm not going to try production design or editing. To kind of let things happen and explore, because one thing leads to another. So you don't always know at the beginning of your career where you're going to end up. And also to do more than is required of you if you're a student. I can always tell which of my students is going to make it, because if I say, I want you to do these 3 drawings for next week, and they come in and they've done 5 drawings, I think, yeah.
That one's got it.
Yeah. When you're, and not because you're driven, but because you love it. I mean, I think also that's another thing that makes people work so hard in this business is, for the most part, they really love it. You know, no one holds a gun to your head and says, you've got to be a famous actor. You know, no parent ever said, that's what I want for you. But the ones that make it are the ones that work hardest, but also do it because they can't imagine doing anything else. They love it so much.
So now that your book is out and you're in the spotlight again, now this is all about you. You're not designing for someone else. This is about you and your career. Are you enjoying this renewed interest in your career, in your life?
Yes, of course. Yes, absolutely. Because, you know, I am proud of my career and I loved writing about it, and I love hearing people's reactions. And you know, yours was very generous and kind, and that is very gratifying. So yeah, it's fun to get out there and talk about these things because they've meant so much to me.
Well, I've really enjoyed being able to spotlight people like you behind the scenes. We recently had Ray Clausen on the show, who was a very well-respected and highly accomplished set designer.
I know, Ray.
And, you know, the public doesn't get access to people like you and Ray or people like Bob Mackie. And now you've written books and you're exposing to us, you know, what that side of the camera looks like, what that side of the stage looks like. I think it's a fabulous thing you've done. And you're probably inspiring other people who may want to pursue that as a career.
I hope so. I hope so. It's a fabulous career. If you can stand the downs, the ups are pretty amazing.
Well, Miss Diana Eden, it has been such a pleasure talking with you about your amazing life and career. And honestly, after reading your book and chatting with you today, I feel like I made a new friend. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on our show.
Thank you. It was fun for me too.
Our guest has been the highly acclaimed costume designer and author, Diana Eden. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you to our producer, Steve Silver. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Remember to subscribe to the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. And be sure to check out more great interviews with Harvey Brownstone on harveybrownstoneinterviews.com.